arrested in custody, of course, as we speak, on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Michael Cole, the royal commentator, joins us. Michael, good afternoon to you. This is hugely significant. It was a shocking, I think, for most of us, even those of us that follow this stuff, thinking, wow, a member of the, or former member of the royal family, but we take the point, is now sitting in a police cell, courtesy of Thames Valley Police.
Ian, I speak to you and all your viewers and listeners on an extraordinary day in the history and the destiny of the monarchy and indeed of this country. Unprecedented, it is extraordinary, one might even venture the word unique. And of course, all on Prince Andrew's birthday, as he then was Prince Andrew, born there, second son of the late Queen, in 1960. I remember it well. It was a year of royal babies, and he was the first of them. Really remarkable. Arrested this morning, 8 o'clock, 8 police officers, but support for constabulary, went to, it was one of the big residences on the Sandringham estate, where indeed the late Duke of Edinburgh lived shortly before he died. A historic part of the estate, and then he's gone. Of course, we don't know yet, but to a police station, and I imagine he's going to be, at this moment, probably being interviewed under caution.
Just tell us, Michael, your phone line is being a little bit tricky, but I think we've still no, that's okay. We've still got you. Just explain. You know a bit more about this man than most. How would somebody like the former Prince Andrew be feeling right now?
Well, I think it must be an extremely unpleasant experience for anybody, but particularly somebody in his position or his former rank. Of course, in recent years, he's been criticised for being arrogant and dismissive of people. He's certainly changed over the years. Ian, I met him 40 years ago, just short, in fact, on the day that he became engaged to the then Miss Sarah Ferguson. And he was very ebullient, he was very friendly. You have to remember that he'd returned quite recently from the Falklands War, where he'd been regarded as having done his duty. He was a very popular member of the royal family, and indeed, at the time of the engagement and indeed the wedding in 1986, the Duke of York, as he became on the morning of his wedding, and the newly married Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, were extraordinarily popular at that time. It as a breath of fresh air, and I went on tours around the world, Canada I remember particularly, and they were very highly regarded. They of course were together for 10 years. Their marriage lasted for 10 years, but it's been a rather extraordinary or unusual divorce in the sense that they've come back together and lived together and were living at the Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park before he had to surrender his 75-year lease and move to the Sandringham estate. Why did he do that? Because the Sandringham estate, like Balmoral, is personally owned by the or the monarch of the day, and it was not public property. And of course, the Royal Lodge was part of the Crown Estates and ultimately owned by the people.
Thursday, it already has been extraordinary scenes this morning as the police swooped on Sandringham. Coppers going to the rear and the front of Andrew's house to make sure he did not do a runner. I mean, unbelievable. Let's go over, as I said, to the author of entitled The Decline and Fall of the House of York. This was the bombshell book described as possibly the most devastating, explosive royal book of all time that set the ball rolling, really, on a story that brings us to the extraordinary events of today. Welcome to Andrew Lowney.
Nice to be with you again.
Well, what a day. It's Andrew's birthday, so quite an unhappy birthday for him. I think what we've seen today, I mean, it's not an absolute shock. I mean, we knew events were leading towards this, but to actually see it happen is just mind-blowing, mind-blowing. Now, you know, alone in this country, you probably knew that the direction of travel was heading to this moment longer than any of us because of your research for your extraordinary book entitled. But your thoughts now that it has actually come to this, were you as sort of stunned as I was to actually see this happening, the King's brother being arrested and taken into custody for questioning?
Absolutely. I've been saying for days I thought that he would do a runner and he wouldn't face justice. I'm thrilled the police have acted as swiftly as they have. I thought they would drag their feet and kind of try and find reasons not to follow up. So I really take my hat off to them. This is a real surprise, I think, for all of us. Clearly, there was overwhelming evidence that he had given away confidential information, that there was a case for misconduct in public office, and indeed I think there will be a case for him for sex trafficking and even treason, I think, eventually. But this is remarkable, and whether this move was triggered by inside knowledge that he was about to leave or was destroying material, I don't know. But I think this has done a lot to restore public faith in institutions, to feel that the royals are not above the law, and to lance this boil that Andrew is going to face justice for what he's done.
Well, he'll be somewhere in a police room now being interviewed. These initial police interviews do take many hours, so I'm not expecting him to be released. Well, he could well be released during this show. Obviously, we'll keep everybody updated on that. But I would predict that it's unlikely he will be charged today. The manner of these things, the chronology tends to be, you know, 8 or 9 hours of being interviewed and then released on under caution. That is probably what will happen, but nevertheless, a staggering experience for the former Prince Andrew, and absolutely poleaxing for his brother, the King. Now, let's talk about the ramifications for the royal family. Must stress, of course, Prince Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing and has not been charged at this stage. But you and I have spoken often of this $12 million, I think it was, that the royal family stumped up to give to Andrew in order to hand to Virginia Giuffre, one of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking victims, to shut her up, to stop her going to civil court in New York to claim compensation for her allegation that Andrew sexually assaulted her on 3 different continents, an allegation that he vehemently denies. Most of us say, well, why did you give her $12 million then? So the problem for the royals, I think the epicenter of their blossoming or their exploding problems today is that payoff. What on earth were they thinking? What on earth were they thinking? Giving Andrew that money to hand to a victim of Jeffrey Epstein to keep that paedophile billionaire's sordid secrets. The King is going to have a big problem talking his way out of this, isn't he?
Yes, well, we've discussed this. I mean, you know, we've got to remember that this was a payment made many years ago, before my book was even a glint in my eye, probably, and before clearly these Epstein revelations came out the last few weeks, which have been what's tipped the balance. But yes, I mean, my information is that the King knew far more than he's saying. He is involved, I would say almost complicit in the cover-up. And I mean, if that comes out, then that's clearly very damaging to the monarchy. But as I say, I think this may have lanced the boil. It may have satisfied people that justice was being served, and people will forget that this is perhaps part of a bigger network of protection. I mean, I think we've got, you know, questions now for the former heads of, for example, UKTI, former ambassadors, and others about what they knew. They weren't prepared to talk to me. I hope they'll talk to a parliamentary committee. And I do think that members of staff who perhaps tried to raise these issues but were under pressure because they would lose their jobs and their pensions will be given some immunity to actually speak very openly about what they saw. And this is particularly true of people like the valets, but also the police protection officers, the equerries and others.
Now, I don't know where the police will conduct this interview, but the next bombshell event in this extraordinary saga that we're witnessing right now will be the police sitting down with the King. And that will not necessarily just be an information interview. The King, of course, saying, I'm prepared to fully cooperate with any police investigation. They're going to say to His Majesty, how much did you know? When you gave your brother, or when you and your mother, your late mother, gave your brother $12 million to pay off Virginia Giuffre, surely you didn't just go, well, yeah, okay, here's the money. How much did the King know? How much did Her late Majesty know?
Well, I think we may see a bit of a fudge here. You know, I'm not sure the King will be interviewed. I think a lot of other people around him will be interviewed, and maybe someone will have to speak for him, like a private secretary. But I think the way the police will deal with it is to talk to lots of other people, and clearly they would be knowledgeable about Andrew's activities.
Well, that's not going to be good enough, though, Andrew. As far as I'm concerned, as a citizen of this country and as a subject of the King, that isn't good enough. This deferential treatment of the royal family has to stop, including the King. If they're going to investigate this properly, they need to talk to the King, not his equerries, not his servants, not his officials, him. They need to do that, don't they?
Well, I mean, I hope, as I say, we've reached this Me Too moment of the monarchy where the old-style monarchy is going and we have a new-style monarchy which is much more transparent. I mean, I think it may be a step too far because, of course, the monarch is in fact the nation. I mean, the crown courts and all these things are basically the crown, the king. But let's see how public opinion moves. I think this may be enough to lance the boil, as I say. I mean, if people do feel that there's still a cover-up, then clearly the King will have to talk. But I suspect they're waiting to see if they can get away with it without that happening.
It's not unreasonable just to say, Your Majesty, what did you know? We'll trust him not to lie. But I think that has to happen. But we will await that event with bated breath to whether or not it does actually unfold. I'll tell you who does need to be talked to is all the officials, the government officials, indeed the royal officials who were around Andrew when he was travelling the world as our trade envoy in the noughties, because clearly he stands accused of nefarious activity, of abusing that position. Denies it, of course, but he stands accused of abusing his position in a public office. Now, the people around him will also have to be interviewed. What did they know? Am I right?
Absolutely. And as I approached 3,000 people, 2,700 didn't speak to me, and I hope that some of those people who clearly know a lot will now be prepared to talk to the authorities. I mean, I was told they weren't interested, or good try. And let's hope that, perhaps with PC Plod knocking on their door or a parliamentary committee, they might be a little bit more forthcoming.
The rest of the Ferguson family, if you like, the rest of the Yorks, they need to be talked to as well. Now, you've got to stress, it looks as if the entire York family, was on the take from Jeffrey Epstein. We know Fergie herself, Sarah Ferguson, was, you've told me several times, to the tune of millions of pounds. Clearly, Andrew was getting money from him as well. And it also looks as if it's possible that the two daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, were also kind of on the payroll. In 2015, Princess B was working for Sony. She was earning £19,500 a year. She went on 17 holidays that year to places like ritzy places like Saint-Tropez, Ibiza, Mexico, you name it, she went there, flashy ski resorts. Well, I'll tell you, she wouldn't have been getting the money from her parents So I think they need to be spoken to. Beatrice had a lot to do with the negotiations that took her father towards giving that Newsnight interview in 2019, that disastrous interview. There are stories that she helped her mother get back into Epstein's good books after Fergie, to save her own skin, said he's an awful child sex abuser and I will never have any contact with him again. That was a lie. And of course, Eugenie and Beatrice, the 5 days after Epstein was released from a 13-month jail term for soliciting prostitution from a minor, a paedophile offence, Fergie took her 2 daughters to see Epstein at his Florida mansion, where they dined on vegetable lasagna prepared by his Parisian chef. Now, at the time, people said, oh, how could a mother take her little girls, her poor little girls, to see...
Kevin, I'm going to interrupt you there, if I may. Are there any questions for me that you want to ask? It's an absolutely busy day for me, as you can imagine.
I want to ask you, they need to be talked to, because there they were, the 2 daughters, 19 and 20 they were when they went to see Epstein. They must have known about him as well. They need to be...
Yes, I think the family should be interviewed. They clearly spent a lot of time around Epstein and must have seen things. I think there's a whole range of people that need to be part of this investigation. And I suppose we need to leave that to law enforcement. But just I certainly can provide a list of names of people who I think could be useful to the authorities.
Have the police been in touch with you with a view to...
No, I have contacted. I mean, before all this, I contacted the National Crime Agency and got no response.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? Well, I'm sure they will be in touch. You would expect them to be in touch, wouldn't you?
Well, I hope I have material for them that isn't in the public domain that could be useful. So, yes, I'm very willing to do my bit to help.
When you were researching your astonishing book, I think it's no exact... I agree with the estimation of it as the most devastating bombshell royal biography of all time. And you were unearthing these extraordinary revelations. Did you at that point think, you know what, this is going to lead to something huge, as in what's happening right now?
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, I'm just a biographer who writes books about people, and I try and be as thorough as I can in terms of my research and as scrupulous as I can be. But, I mean, I knew that there was this huge scandal here, but clearly history had suggested that the royals were pretty protected and nothing would happen. But yes, I wanted to highlight what I felt was corruption at the heart of the royal family, abetted by the institution itself. But I never expected that something would follow. But I think, we have to thank the Epstein leaks, really, which have really just brought home the extent of how shameless Andrew was in his behaviour, and provided the hard evidence that I think the police now clearly are going to draw on.
And you've got your amended or your updated edition of your book coming out on May the 1st, is that correct?
May the 21st.
May the 21st. Can we expect even more extraordinary revelations in that?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of new material, even with the revelations from the Epstein leaks. There's a lot of stuff that I've got from other sources. So almost too much. I have 150 pages of notes.
Well, I can't wait to read that. But you mentioned earlier, sort of finally really, Andrew, you mentioned earlier that you see this as a Me Too moment for the royal family. I think what they need to take on board is their traditional impulse to secrecy. They are still a very untransparent organisation. We don't know very much about their money. We know very little about the way they operate. And over the years, over the centuries, I guess, but certainly modern history, their impulse has always been to sort of fold in and to keep their own secrets. Now, they're going to have to, I would suggest, adapt to a more transparent way of life, don't you think?
Well, I've been calling for this for over a decade and been pretty much a lone voice. So I think we have reached a moment where people realize how important it is for proper oversight, proper parliamentary scrutiny to avoid these things happening in the past. I mean, this thing only flourished because there was no proper transparency. And I think if they are to continue to have respect and trust from the British public in this contract that we have for their privileges, they do need to be more open about finances, archives, and all sorts of things.
And, if this goes wrong, if events sort of continue in this direction and go badly wrong for the royal family, in terms of, what we were discussing just now, what the king may or may not know, what the rest of the royal family may or may not know, I mean, this could be almost existential. I mean, people have been talking about, if the king's involvement is, shall we say, deeper than we have been led to believe, if his knowledge of what Andrew was up to is more than we have been led to believe, I mean, this could end up being a kind of abdication crisis, couldn't it?
Well, we need to see how public opinion responds to what's happening. It may be satisfied by the fact that Andrew is facing justice. But you and I have discussed the fact that if Charles is compromised, then clearly there needs to be a clean sweep, and someone else needs to take his place, and they can hide behind his illness and all sorts of things. But I don't think we've quite reached that stage. I think the dramatic events of today, I think, have persuaded a lot of people that the royal family are taking this seriously. Yeah. And I suppose, things may have happened in the past, but it may be convenient just to forget about that.
I agree with you. I think that this has taken the pressure off. Thank God the police have done it. Final question, you're a royal expert. People have said, forget the abdication crisis for Edward VIII. Never mind the crisis that beset the royal family after Diana died in 1998, when they seriously misjudged the mood of the public and the Queen basically had to apologise, that this is developing into the worst royal crisis of modern history.
Yes, I'd second that. I think, and I've said that for a long time, far more important than the abdication. So this is, as you say, it could lead to the end of one reign, possibly.
I don't know if he's been released yet, but I don't think so. He'll be in a police office room somewhere being interviewed by detectives with a view to the fact he is under investigation for allegedly misbehaving in public office, malfeasance, misconduct in public office when he was a trade envoy for this country in the early noughties. But this must be an extraordinary experience for a man, who is the King's brother, spent his entire life, people bowing and scraping to him, he's still eighth in line to the throne. So suddenly, he's had his collar felt. Let's find out, see if we can have a look into what kind of a man and what kind of reaction he'll be having today. Let's have a chat with psychologist Dr. David Holmes. Welcome, David.
Hi there.
Well, first of all, what will it be like? What would it be, in your view, like to be a person like the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, his whole life, at the top of the social scale, living in palaces, people doffing their caps, everything done for him, servants, very privileged life, gilded palace existence. He's sitting in a police room now being interviewed by detectives. This morning they swooped on his house, front door and back door, to make sure he didn't run out. They treated him like any other common or garden suspect. They read him his rights. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, you are under arrest on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Come with us. You do not have to say anything, etc., etc. What would that be like for a person like that? That must be a really shocking experience.
It's got to be a little bit of a shock to him. This is probably the first time he's been thrown into a room with a hard bench, nothing else. Really, nothing else. That's it. Bit of a window which is barred, and that's it. And a door that is impenetrable and has a little spy hole. He's had a very privileged adulthood and possibly his teens. However, his early childhood may have been closer to the model, because I would imagine he would have been brought up with fair strictures as to what he can and can't do, particularly in public. But having that royal tag, having that sort of invulnerability when it comes to the strictures of society, I think he may have played his cards a little bit too wide and have actually been there when it's been not appropriate. What we don't know about him is possibly the background of other activities that may not be entirely acceptable, and certainly probably wouldn't be acceptable to the rest of his family. You could say that Charles was a fairly upright chap and pretty much a law-abiding chap. He seems to have a strong moral sense. Perhaps unlike his father, who may have perhaps had more of an influence on Andrew in terms of his flippancy when it comes to treating others as equals.
Although I think Philip was never condescending or rude or arrogant towards staff and servants. Andrew has a terrible reputation for that. Do you think, I mean, you know, Royal Protection detectives who worked with him, they just said he was arrogant, rude, impossible. Do you think that kind of character might have emanated from the fact that he was well known to be his mother, the Queen's favourite son? I mean, is what you can see of his personality, is that classic of the spoilt brat?
It could be, you know, a primary example. Basically, the spoilt brat has this sensation that whatever they do, it will be okay, and it will be all right, and it will be seen by others as being okay and all right, particularly the parents, of course. That sense of privilege is often given to the younger child in a family, and inadvertently often by the parents, but it has a profound effect over the years, and the relations with their siblings can become quite competitive, and sometimes you could be the totally irresponsible child who sees no wrong in what they do whatsoever.
What a nightmare birthday for former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. I mean, I was talking to Andrew Lowney earlier, and I've talked to other people about this extraordinary story. One of the most remarkable stories of my long and checkered career. Can't remember anything bigger than this. The King's brother has been arrested. He is currently in custody, being interviewed by police on charges of misconduct in a public office relating to when he was the trade envoy in the noughties. No charges yet, important to stress that. But I mean, that it should come to this, Kinsey. I mean, you're a seasoned royal reporter, royal watcher. I mean, this isn't unexpected, but to see it actually happen, it's just shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for years, the scandal surrounding Andrew was treated as a royal disgrace. Tonight, it has become a criminal crisis. With him now under arrest and in custody, investigators are examining whether his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein involved not just damaging associations, but the possible disclosure of sensitive government information linked to his official role abroad. Not likely what we ever assumed he would be investigated for, because we've heard whispers of much more vulgar behavior over the last few years, and accusations and payouts to Virginia Giuffre. This is no longer about bad judgment, catastrophic interviews, or just palace embarrassment. The focus has shifted to whether a senior royal may have breached the law while representing Britain. And under UK law, as I've heard you say on this program, misconduct in public office carries severe legal consequences. Authorities must now decide whether the evidence warrants full criminal charges. And if prosecutors move forward, the implications are extraordinary. What began as a royal scandal would become one of the most serious constitutional and legal threats the modern monarchy has faced. But I will say, seeing King Charles sitting front row at New York Fashion Week while the you-know-what is hitting the fan, I'm a little tickled by that. I mean,
is that where he is today? Is that where he is?
He's there right now.
You're kidding.
I'm
didn't
not
realise that.
kidding.
He's at New York Fashion Week watching
the London Fashion Week. I apologize.
The London Fashion. I was going to say,
London Fashion Week.
Well, I suppose, Kinsey, I mean, I share your shock at that. But that said, I suppose the King, it's important for him to deliver the impression that it's business as usual, that he's going about his job, going about.
Well, no, I think he's saying you're on your own, and I love that.
Well, yeah, well, you saw the statement.
You deal with it.
You saw the statement. I mean, the statement that he issued didn't mention his brother. I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in a public office. He never once mentions that this guy is his brother. But he's made it very clear, and he makes it clear in this statement, which he issued about midday today, that, you know, him and the whole family are prepared to cooperate with the police. The police are going to have to interview the King, aren't they?
I mean, I truly don't believe that the King is going to have... I think the King can give them, you know, details of Andrew's travels. He can encourage anybody that has any sort of documentation surrounding Andrew during his time as a working royal. I mean, I keep getting asked, should the King abdicate? Does he have to step down? Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was never a working royal under the King Charles reign. I don't believe that this falls on King Charles. But the King probably does have access to flight logs, to, you know, itineraries for when Andrew was working as an envoy and was a working British royal, and he could provide those kind of details to the investigators. But, you know, I think I told you this already. When Tom Bower and I spoke, Tom Bower was like, these two people don't like each other. King Charles would not know a lot about what was going on in Andrew's private and personal life because they don't have anything to talk about. They don't have a lot in common. You know, the King was always so focused on this inevitable role, and Randy Andy was clearly always focused on me. What can I get? What can you do for me right here, right now?
Yeah, indeed. But in terms of his relationship with Epstein, not in terms of the potential or the accusation that he basically sold British secrets to his billionaire friend, American friend, Jeffrey Epstein, convicted paedophile. Not apart from that, 9 police forces here in Britain are now investigating allegations that he was involved in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. The former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, no less, saying 90 flights came into this country with Epstein's girls on them, and some of them went to the palace to be entertained by the then Prince Andrew. Now,
and after Epstein's arrest, when Andrew should have absolutely knew better, Andrew should have cut him off.
Yeah, so, you know, he's got, you know, potentially a lot more problem coming down the tracks. But what I think that the King needs to be spoken to about is this $12 million that the royal family got together to hand to Prince Andrew, as he was then, to hand to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking victim, Virginia Giuffre, who accused Andrew of sexually assaulting her on 3 different continents. Andrew, of course, denies, can't even recall meeting her, allegedly. So he denies those allegations. But one would have to think that the police, at some point, would have to say to the King, well, why was Andrew given that $12 million?
I mean, you know, it was originally reported that the King had anything, like the King was associated with that at all. And I apologize if it's not the correct outlet that I'm quoting, but I believe it was the Telegraph over the weekend that stressed that the King in no way, shape, or form was associated
well,
with that.
He says he wasn't. Yeah. So the Sun last week, the Sun newspaper, I think it was last week, published the details, or what they said were the details of the breakdown of that money that was given to Andrew to silence Virginia Giuffre. The majority of it was apparently supplied by the late Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth II. According to the Sun's information, some of that money was supplied by the King. The King said, Prince Charles as he was then, said that isn't the case. But I do think the royal family are going to have to talk about this. Why on earth would the royal family hand a woman $12 million not to go to a civil court in New York and reveal the sordid details of what Jeffrey Epstein was up to? Why would they do that? That is a bad look for the royal family.
It is a bad look for the royal family. I think they were just trying to stop the bleeding, and what an expensive cost to try to stop the bleeding. They wanted to focus on the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, which sounds ludicrous to say out loud, that an event was more important than getting to the bottom of the truth and finding out how deep Andrew's ties were with this predator, and if there could be anything else potentially embarrassing out there. And look, it's taken years. It's honestly taken years for all of this to come out. I think that it would be in the King's best interest to address the public in some way, shape, or form. I really do. The London Fashion Week is like the antithesis of that. Like he's saying, like, you look, you're on your own, I'm throwing you under the bus. But I do think that the public would like to hear from him and hear that he's outraged and disgusted and disappointed and is on their side and believes that these people should be held accountable. But I do not blame him for that payout. We remember the stories about the friction that would happen between Prince Charles' camp and Queen Elizabeth's camp, and that we hear today against Prince William and King Charles's camp. The air is always punching up, saying, let me have a voice. And the monarch is always saying, wait your turn. So I do not believe that the king had any sort of, say in how they navigated the Epstein situation back then.
Yeah, sure. It's a good point. And, I understand what they were doing. But when Andrew said, listen, I need $12 million, they must have said why. And if he said, well, there's this woman that I've never met, and she says that I abused her on 3 different continents, so I want to give her $12 million to shut up. The royals would have surely said, well, if you'd never met her, why'd you want the money? So the question is what did he tell them at that point in order to get that money that he needed to pay off Virginia Giuffre?
Have a look at this. This is Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, pictured leaving a police station following his arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office. There you go, hardly the most flattering snap. Looks a little bit terrified, doesn't he? Good, I am glad. Arrested on his birthday, of course. He's been released after an investigation that's lasted almost 12 hours. Who knows where we go from here? Very unprecedented. That picture, my goodness, look at that. That's one for the ages, isn't it? And certainly, depending how this unravels, well, we'll see. More pictures, no doubt, to follow. Let's bring in the brilliant historian and broadcaster. I love him to bits. Hopefully he's wearing his waistcoat. It is Rafe Hadel-Mancu. Hi, Rafe.
Hello, my dear. Always lovely to be with you.
Oh, you always look so dapper. You have such sartorial elegance. And your house, I want to come hang out in that house. It looks like it's just an antiques haven.
Well, having a nice little gin and tonic after a very long day of covering an insane story, as you can imagine.
Well, here you go. One more little shift to do, and then you can get stuck into that G&T. I mean, look, let's look at this from a position of history, because we've sort of done it in the first half from a position of news. But as a historian, this is a very culturally significant moment.
It is indeed. I mean, historically, it's without precedent in modern history. You have to go back to 1647 for the last time a royal was held in custody. And that was King Charles I after he lost the English Civil War, when Parliament seized him. So that, in that context, I mean, this really is a remarkable moment. It's also, I would say, what I've said for a long time, actually, that the Epstein scandal is the biggest political and royal crisis in modern history. It's much bigger than the Profimo scandal of 1963, which ultimately led to the downfall of the Macmillan government, if you think about Mandelson and what's happened with all of that. And it's bigger than the abdication crisis of 1936, where we saw King Edward VIII abdicate in order to marry an American divorcee and become the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Because in 1936, now we think about Edward VIII being pro-Nazi and all of this. No one knew that back in 1936. It was a romance story. It was a man who gave up being king and emperor to marry the woman he loved, and there was a great deal of support there. This is a very different story. This is bigger than Rufimo, bigger than the abdication crisis combined. And of course, that there are now questions for the monarchy itself to ask about who knew what and when. And the monarchy's traditional mantra has always been never complain, never explain. And that worked very well in the past. But this is a very different situation.
I mean, one thing that I would assume is that when we saw the fallout of Megxit, God, I haven't said that word for ages. When we saw the fallout of that, it was very clear that the different royal households sort of operate completely separately and sort of speak to each other via their press officers and their courtiers. And so I'm not particularly worried that other members of the royal family would have known what Andrew was up to in this regard. I don't see any reason why they should know any more than, if somebody's dodgy uncle who lives in a different town was doing something, why the niece would know. Or, do you know what I mean? But what is interesting now is the optics of how this plays out, because the allegations against him, in terms of basically giving classified information to an individual, possibly for personal gain, comes with a jail sentence. And the optics of potentially Andrew in a court of law being sentenced to imprisonment and then being inside a prison, I mean, that is, that's one heck of a photograph for the ages.
And the ages is the correct term, because, he's being investigated, may be charged in a few weeks with misconduct in public office. That comes with a potential life imprisonment sentence. We're not talking about a slap on the wrist here. He's also being investigated for breaching the Official Secrets Act. That comes with a potential 2-year sentence. And even he could be considered for the National Security Act 23, which also carries a life imprisonment sentence. Now, don't think what he's done merits a life sentence, but like that. But these are very significant potential offences. Of course, the Crown Prosecution Service and the police wouldn't necessarily go to the length of arresting him if they didn't think that they had real grounds for laying a charge, because he's such a high-profile figure. Something has come to light recently that has changed the situation. Obviously, we've got the Epstein files being released, but we don't know whether what they're acting on is what we all know about, or whether there's stuff that they've discovered which has not yet been made privy to the public, or it actually just could be that because the king said in his last statement that the palace was willing to work with the police, it could very well be that the police have gone to the palace, spoken with them, accessed some communications there, and found evidence that has led to this arrest. We don't know, but the reality is you don't arrest someone like this. I mean, it's quite normal, actually, not to arrest someone in this situation. Standard procedure is to invite someone to come in for questioning. The fact that they chose to arrest Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and on his birthday does lead to some other questions as well.
Well, evidently, they needed to have a search warrant to then go into those royal residences and take materials out that they're now going to scan. And to be able to get a search warrant, you've had to have a conversation with the lawyer, the Crown Prosecution Service, that the threshold has been crossed, that there's enough evidence to suggest this needs to take place. My understanding is Shabana Mahmood was told in advance, but not the royal family, which of course is normal. I don't see why they should have phoned up anyone and said, oh, by the way, we're off to arrest your brother. I feel very sorry in many respects for King Charles, because he's faced so much. This poor man, how long has he been king for? Like 5 years, 6 years? He's himself. He's got cancer. His daughter-in-law cancer. His brother exposed as hanging out with a paedophile and potentially selling state secrets, and his mad wife, who seems to be absolutely besotted with Epstein, and her daughters are now inculcated in all of this. You know, we've had riots on the streets of Britain. We've got an economy that looks like it's about to collapse. You just sort of think, you know, the Queen once said, oh, she's had an annus horribilis. I'm like, poor Charles, he's had a whole blimmin' Regnus horribilis.
Yeah, and thankfully we haven't seen a huge decline in support for the monarchy over this. A lot of people are saying, you know, well, this is going to bring down the monarchy. The king should abdicate, to which I say absolute nonsense. The king is not going to abdicate over this. The king has no reason to abdicate over this, and the monarchy still remains secure and strong. And yes, your sympathies, you know, have to go out to His Majesty, because you know, the longest wait apprenticeship in history as Prince of Wales, he finally gets to become king, and the first part of his reign so far completely overshadowed by the outrageous conduct of his wayward son and his daughter-in-law. Then, of course, we have Andrew's saga, plus cancer and everything else that's going on. And the king has done all that he can within his own power to deal with the situation. He has stripped him of Andrew of all his royal offices, stripped him of all his honors and titles. There's nothing more that he could actually do. And he's, of course, sent him into exile in Sandringham, in Wood Farm, later on in Marsh Farm. And of course, everyone in the royal family, including Andrew as well, assumed that being sent into the wilds of Norfolk would mean that he would live the rest of his time in obscurity, gradually fading from public perception. No one could imagine that he would actually end up now in hotter water than he's ever been in before.
So where do they go forward with this? Because, you know, like I said, it could, and I couldn't put odds on this. I don't know one way or the other because I don't understand the legal implications. We don't know until things are fully investigated. But he could end up in prison. That would be remarkable. One imagines he would have to be in a high-security isolation ward because he's such a high-profile person. You can imagine if he goes to your average UK prison jammed full of Islamists, he'd be a very popular target. If he doesn't end up in prison, where do they put him? There was conversations that maybe he could be excommunicated out to the Middle East. But again, I think he's a sitting security target there. Any nation who wanted to embarrass the United Kingdom, you just have to invite Andrew over to, you know, your regular harem, and he's going to get stuck right in, isn't he? And the two princesses now, it would appear from things that are manifesting from the Epstein releases that even when, you know, they were a bit more grown up, they kind of knew about the relationship between their mum and Epstein. They always used to go hang out on the islands. Perhaps they were bankrolling their royal lifestyles. It's been suggested that for 15 years, Epstein said he was paying for Sarah Ferguson, and those girls grew up going on lots of lovely foreign holidays. And there's even a suggestion that there was a communication where she had said to one of them had said to her mother, well, you know, come out and just say he served his time in prison. I mean, it's that whole family now is sort of, in terms of the optics for the House of Windsor, nuclear waste.
Yes, I mean, hitherto the British public have been very sympathetic towards the two daughters, thinking, of course, that the sins of the father can't be meted out onto the children. All we have is speculation, though. We don't really know the full details on any of this stuff, so I'm loath to go down that path at the moment. But yes, you're quite right. Look, we're only in the foothills of all of this. Firstly, there have to be questions asked of the British police. Why did the British police not go months ago to the American Department of Justice and ask them to give them whatever they had on Andrew in the Epstein files? Could this arrest not have been made months and months earlier? Is it actually the case that Andrew was being treated differently to everybody else because he was born a prince of the blood royal? Those are questions that the police need to ask. The second thing, of course, is all of this just deals with misconduct in public office in relation to his role as a trade envoy, email sent to Epstein in 2010. We now have, of course, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown calling for an investigation into the issue of sex trafficking, with 90 flights on the Lolita Express, Epstein's private jet, coming into the UK, 15 of them after he was freed from prison for being a sex convict. So those are questions to be asked. And of course, we have allegations by women, of course, that they were sex trafficked. There are 7 different police investigations going on in this country. So many investigations that the different police forces have all joined up now. So they're all working together on these different things. this is all still going to get even worse potentially for Andrew.
I think it is. I think it is. And I just, I can imagine this is going to have to lead to a number of crisis conversations for the royal family, and I do not envy them that. It's always extremely difficult for any family when you have somebody in that family who does atrocious things and the whole world knows about it, because you can choose your friends, can't you? But you cannot pick your relatives.
Former royal editor of the Sun newspaper. Charlie, where to start? Andrew is back on the Sandringham estate, but it's not impossible that at some point he'll be accommodated in His Majesty's prison.
Absolutely, Mark. It depends how this police investigation goes and what they discover, and if in fact he is charged and faces a trial. Now, if he does that and is found guilty, then he could face actually life in prison, which would be, well, everything. If we open up the pages of any newspaper, listen to any news program at all, everything's sensational on that day. Sensational today, and that will be equally a sensational day as well.
Most definitely. I've got to draw your attention to a developing story, Charlie. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I'll describe it. It's the respected US media site TMZ, who have just released photos, we assume, from the cache of documents from the latest Epstein files release. This is a photograph, if you can see your screen at the moment,
yes,
and I'll describe it to those listening on the radio. Andrew on all fours on a rug, we understand, in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, with a small child, could be his grandchild, we don't know. But Andrew's playing with this kid, no problem, no suggestion of criminal activity there at all, except that the child is in possession of a ball that is a direct mock-up of a human breast, a wildly inappropriate toy for a child to be in possession of. What do you make of this image?
Well, if that is the case, then it is completely inappropriate. But I mean, as others have said this morning, we have to be careful on all these sort of things. There's going to be an awful lot of photographs released, and we have to look at the context of it. Now, this was taken at Royal Lodge, so it's more than likely that that child, who's about a year, 18 months old, is likely to be one of his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And he's, like many grandparents, is on all fours and playing with them. The question of the ball is, I think, as others have said as well, is open to interpretation. I'm not disputing that it may be in the shape of a breast. If it is, it's quite appalling. But it could be, as one of your other guests said, it could be a deflated balloon.
I mean, I do agree with you fully about, keeping one's counsel on this until we have more detail and more context. But there are other images that are on this website, which is TMZ, which is a respected US outlet, whereby it's very clearly an absolute replica of a human breast, of a female breast. And you just wonder, don't you, about Andrew's judgment, something that you've called into doubt for many years now, Charlie.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. If that is the case, then what on earth was he thinking of it all, playing with that sort of ball-shaped breast? It's quite ridiculous. But then again, this is a man who hasn't got any taste or moral compass at all, to be perfectly honest.
Charlie, what's your appraisal of the King's handling of this so far? We had a statement yesterday. I think there's not much more he can do at the moment. But has he been slow to act? I mean, let's not forget, Charlie, that it was 2020 when the Queen reportedly wrote that cheque for £12 million to Andrew's sex accuser, Virginia Giuffre. At that point, why didn't he lose the Duke of York title? Why didn't he cease to be Prince Andrew, particularly once Charles took to the throne?
Because I'm assuming that because Andrew will have told the Queen and the now King at that time that these allegations, as he has continued to say all the time, were not true, and he is fighting them. You're absolutely right. It goes back to 2020, but there is no investigation at the moment that's going on about those allegations involving the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. What we're talking about now is misconduct in public office, which is equally a serious offence. And I have to say, I still think there should be still some investigation into the allegations of trafficking of these women. But we're dealing with something else, which is much more recent. Now, I think the King has done very well so far. There is not much else. He's not responsible for the prosecution. He can only be responsible for what he's already done. He's removed Andrew from Royal Lodge. He's now in exile in Sandringham. He's not got any of his royal titles or any of his paraphernalia anymore. What else can the King do? And I have to say that this story is probably one of the top 10 best royal stories of modern times, to be perfectly honest. And it's going to run and run. It's going to. I often think of the royal family as a modern day living soap opera, and this is one of the greatest events that's happening in it. And I'm afraid that the King and the rest of the royal family are going to have to live with the tainting of the royal family, which it's tainted, and people will still continue to ask questions, as you have done this morning, quite rightly so. What did he know? When did he know? And, why has he not done any more? He can't do any more.
Let's get reaction on the policing side of this with Mike Neville, who is a retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Mark.
How much work will have gone into yesterday's raid?
Well, I've been very careful consideration. In the police, you have a gold, silver, bronze sort of situation. The gold commander would be a very senior officer. In this case, it seems to be Assistant Chief Constable Wright of the Thames Valley Police. He would have been setting the strategy, and there would have been something like a Detective Chief Superintendent in the overall charge, and then a superintendent or a DCI, somebody like me, sent to make the arrest, and all the teams would have been prepared, a full list of items that they were looking for, and so it would have been very well prepared. And I think we've got to congratulate the Thames Valley Police on their swift response to this criminal investigation.
Yes, and 20 officers from Thames Valley Police, supported by their colleagues from the Norfolk Constabulary, were involved in the raid. They drove 130 miles from the police headquarters in Oxfordshire to the village of Wolverton, which is on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. So a huge amount of resource and personnel involved, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. What struck me when I read the story is that they sent police cars around the front and the back as though Andrew might do a runner. You can just imagine him trying to get over the fences, and it's a standard police thing that you always send officers to ensure no one runs off from the rear of the premises. But I don't think Andrew was going to do this in the case. But here, the key thing now, Mark, will be the digital examination of laptops, computers, phones, tablets, to extract any data which is relevant to this inquiry. What has been official documents have been sent to any other person? Is there any financial impropriety that's potentially on those things? But these digital forensic experts, they pore over these computers. They're a special type of person who does this, but it takes a long time. This is not a matter of days. This is a matter of weeks to extract the information, and then they can brief the senior investigating officer, who will then have a series of questions which he can then put to the former Prince Andrew when he returns on bail.
Caroline Aston also joins us, Mike, royal commentator and broadcaster. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning to you.
What did you make of those scenes yesterday?
Well, absolutely unique. I mean, this was an historic day, quite a 66th birthday present, I would say, to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and one that will have shaken him to the core, because for years he's existed with this shroud, this Teflon-like quality implied by the word royalty. And of course, being royal, the privileges, the perks, are an accident of birth. The price to be paid is one of service, selfless service, not self-service. And there's this horrible cocktail of stuff going on out there at the moment. And really, will it hold the monarchy below the waterline? Maybe not. But it can tarnish its reputation, and it's a long, hard struggle back from anything like that. So, yes, a momentous day in royal history, and the last time we arrested a royal was Charles I, who paid the ultimate price when we chopped his head off. But don't forget, 11 years later, we restored the monarchy. They're survivors.
They are survivors. Mike, they often say when it comes to a criminal prosecution that the process is the punishment. This could take months or even years to resolve, couldn't it?
Yes, I imagine the actual examination of the devices, as I say, will take at least a couple of months, and then it's what it throws up. You know, this is an international sort of mix of people. When you examine a phone, what's going to be on things like WhatsApp, who's been in contact there. So there's just so many things that could be thrown back by this. Who else is involved? Is there any link, for example, to Mandelson, who's also been dealt with for a similar allegation? And so the police will have to decide at some point where they cut it off, because you can keep going and going and going on this. But when I hear about it being a complex case, I always come back to that when I talk about complex crimes or data protection, things like that, GDPR, I always think, what would my mother have thought? Now, if I said to my mother, I've received these sensitive documents from the government about trade, and do you know what? I'm going to send them to a mate secretly who might make money out of them. What would my mother tell me? Was that a good or a bad thing? Sometimes you've got to cut things down to the sort of common sense, and I think common sense speaks for itself here.
Yes, it's the Marr-Neville test, and it's a good one, isn't it, Mike? We've got a developing story at 7:34 on Talk Breakfast, Caroline and Mike. This is the respected US media outlet TMZ. On any other day, this would be massive news. Another photograph released, presumably from the Epstein files, Mike and Caroline, of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor on all fours on a rug, we understand in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, with a young child around perhaps 12 or 18 months of age, playing with a ball that looks exactly like a human breast. Mike, where to start with this?
Well, first off, I mean, my expertise is around images, and you've got to be very careful these days because of AI. It's very much advanced. You don't know what you're seeing. Secondly, things look odd. It could well be that. It could be something. It could be a balloon that's sort of deflated. Who knows? This will have to be looked into. If the police have this, they can look at the other devices and see if there's anything.
I can tell you that there are multiple rather higher quality close-up images, and this ball does appear, Mike, on the face of it, to be some kind of sort of comedy device, you know, like a sort of funny football, but very clearly and very identifiably a human breast, which, if that is the case, is wildly inappropriate. No suggestion of any criminal act on the part of Andrew, but poor judgment, and takes a young child into a sexual sphere.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the case, absolutely. I don't know that I can't say a crime has been committed, but all it does is just further show that Andrew's judgment is absolutely poor. It's just disgraceful, and it'll just condemn him again in the eyes of the public, and it will do irreparable damage to the royal family. It's very, very sad when you think of all the service from the Queen. I'm an ex-soldier as well. We all swore our oath of allegiance to the Queen, and it's just tragic to see. So another example, Mark, I think, of broken Britain again, isn't it? Everything we held dear seems to be falling apart in front of our eyes.
Most definitely. Now, of course, Caroline, Mike is right to say that we need context to these images, these latest images of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, a young child, and a ball that looks exactly like a human breast. We need context. We need to verify those images. I will say that TMZ is a respected US media outlet. Your reaction to this developing story, I think it's going to be a big one today.
I would totally agree with you, and I absolutely agree. What poor judgment. Optics are all, aren't they, in today's world? And this is a pretty dreadful picture. But then, of course, throughout his royal career, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been seen as boneheaded, a buffoon, arrogant, totally wrapped up in his royal position. The phrase, "my mother the Queen," was perpetually on his lips. And I, for one, am really rather glad that his mother, who was very partial to him, don't forget, is not here to see this. That would have been almost insufferable. And it is worth mentioning that when he was appointed as a trade envoy, 2001, those 10 years he served as that, his brother, then Prince of Wales, now the King, was not keen on him being given that position. There was always a bit of froideur between the two brothers, and it appears that Charles's judgment about his brother's capabilities, he was right perhaps to be a little concerned about what might develop. But ongoing, I think Andrew's got to keep his head down. After all, he's in those Siberian wastes of Sandringham behind his security fence. But I have to say, the optics we saw, this photograph of him coming home at the end of a day of being forensically grilled, presumably, by the police, he looked a shattered man. He looked as though he didn't quite know where he was or indeed what he was, because the balloon of self-importance had been well and truly punctured in a very public way.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is still in line to the throne. I think he's 8th in line to the throne. Should that be looked at, Neil?
Yes. Yes. What you have, when you have crises like this, you have to act. You can't just sit back and think to yourself, well, it'll just sort itself out. You know, he's gone from every other area of public life. Then they should just tidy this up and they should remove him from the line of succession. You know, the thing is, this is a man who learns nothing, is it? Of all the things, this is a brilliant page 1 by my old newspaper, The Sun, incidentally. But, you know, his arrogance shines through. He thinks he can skulk away. He thinks he can hide and squirms down in the back seat. What he ought to have done is sit up straight, look the world in the eye and take it all on the chin. He looks terrible. And this is an image, as you rightly said at the top of the show, this image will haunt him.
Yes, it's damning, isn't it? He looks like he's got a rabbit in the headlights, and consumed with terror and shame as well he might be. Rupert, do you think that Andrew should cease to be in line to the throne?
Absolutely. I think it's... Look, he's never going to be king because he's 8th in line. But so you just actually want to say it would just tidy it up. It would just... Because he is bringing so much disgrace. He's now lost his title. This is just another step forward. And Neil's quite right. I mean, he has been arrogant since probably the day he was born. You know, that attitude, nothing has changed him. But it's taken till his 66th birthday to actually realise what most people have thought of him. He hasn't got the intelligence. That's part of the problem.
That's true.
To see beyond the end of his nose and what he's actually doing, and as a result, he's caused all these problems. Couple that with his arrogance, his stupidity, then this is what you lead to. So I think it's not completely straightforward to strip him of being in the line of succession, but it should happen, and it should happen quickly.
If that were to happen, then Parliament would need to pass new primary legislation, an Act of Parliament, specifically removing him from the line of succession. But because the monarch is shared across 15 Commonwealth realms, for example, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, any changes to the rules of succession would, by convention under the Statute of Westminster 1931, require agreement from those other realms. So it wouldn't be easy, but it's doable. Should it happen, Kinsey? Should Andrew be removed from the line of succession?
And as a councillor of state, I think so. And I think they should also remove Prince Harry. I think that they should do a clean sweep and get rid of anyone that the public dismisses or the public's not confident in representing the British royal family.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And Kinsey, how do you see things playing out in the next few hours?
I mean, you know, we know what the royal family are going to do. They're going to keep calm and carry on. We will continue to hear from third-party sources what's really going on behind the scenes. You know, William's frustrated with Andrew. He is glad that things are moving as quickly as they are. We'll hear whispers like that. But again, I would feel much more confident about the situation if we would hear from King Charles specifically. And Rupert, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I just don't see King Charles doing that.
Rupert?
I'm not sure what he can add. Kinsey and I don't usually disagree on things, but we may, for about the first time, actually disagree on something, because I'm not sure at the moment, until the police investigation goes another stage further, because he's allowing the court of law and the due process of that. So given that statement, which he has honestly said, and you have to take it on trust, that he will give the authorities full support, then I think at this stage that may be enough. But the royal family have got to be aware of the public opinion. You remember, this is the biggest, it's far bigger than the crisis that was around Princess Diana's death and the thought that the royal family were just ignoring public opinion. I think they're fully aware of what the public opinion are thinking. The public is thinking about the royal family, that they have got to get a grip of this and seem to be doing the right things. But whether the king can actually say anything that actually is additional to that statement, I'm not sure. But I'm sure there will be people behind the scenes thinking it through, and maybe advice from the government. Many people might say, is that a good thing given their lack of ability to communicate correctly? It's going to be an interesting period, and it's going to take some really deep thought from the royal family as to how they present their response to this above and beyond what the Kings and Prince William have said in the last 24 hours.
Briefly, Rupert, can the scandal be contained within the Andrew brand, or is it inevitable it will contaminate the royal family and the institution of the monarchy?
I think we've got to worry about, this money that was paid to Virginia Giuffre. Why was that? Who knew where that money came from? That's a big question mark. So did the king know? These are all the issues. But at the moment, Andrew seems to be the ultimate, the poster boy for the Epstein files in terms of where it's being headed legally. You just wonder, and a lot of my friends are saying, yes, we understand why Andrew is being investigated like this. What's going on in America? There seems to be no one suffering the same kind of issues. Well, suffering may not be the right word, is not being investigated like Andrew is. So is America going to sort of take some lead from this and actually then maybe start to investigate some of the other people? So for Andrew and the royal family, this is a big problem. But I'm still sure, and maybe in America, Kinsey would know, is the Epstein files going to create a bigger problem for the current administration than it already is?
Well, you raise a good point there, Rupert. Why aren't cops talking to Bill Gates, to perhaps to President Donald Trump, to Bill Clinton, and to many others? We're going to catch up again shortly. My thanks to Rupert Bell, Talk's royal correspondent, and Kinsey Schofield. Thank you, Kinsey, host of Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered, who has sent us an extraordinary photograph published by the US news website TMZ, in which Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is on a rug, reportedly in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, with a very young child that's playing with a ball that looks like a human breast. It's a deeply inappropriate toy for a child to be playing with. And there's Andrew on all fours. No suggestion of any criminal activity there. But the bottom line is another image that will resonate, another image that will bring embarrassment on the royal family, if not worse. Now, Neil, you wanted to chip in.
It was a reality check, really. The process of this, everything is about now, this is an active investigation, as you're paying obvious heed to, where people have to be very careful about what they do and what they say. So the reality is, I don't believe that anyone would advise any of the royals to make any kind of further statement until this is resolved.
So you don't think Charles should address the nation at this moment?
I don't think he can, other than to say, yes, process should follow, things should see through their course. But in terms of what we're really talking about, some sort of further dissociation, I don't think he's going to feel, and he's going to be advised by the police, shall we say, not to do anything that could be used to dilute effectively any further legal action. Once it does happen, then I think you're going to see the whole walls fall down. And I think within days of any culmination of this is when you will see action in Parliament, action by the royals because they so want to get rid of this. And Prince William is incandescent. And it's very interesting to me to see he hasn't made any kind of statement yet.
No, definitely. That's my understanding too, that he's absolutely furious about the embarrassment that his uncle has brought to the family. Well, if you're just joining us at 6:33 on Talk Breakfast, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has been released under investigation after arrest for misconduct in public office. He's back at home on the Sandringham estate. He denies all wrongdoing. He's not been arrested for anything surrounding Virginia Giuffre or any other allegation that followed the release of the Epstein files. It just relates to his time as a trade envoy for the British government. Here's a voice note from Perry.
Morning, Mark. I was brought up as a royalist. I've always been a royalist. I do love the royal family. Obviously, this will damage the king. I think we do have a very weak king at the moment. You know, Keir Starmer wants to give away some of his territory. He hasn't mentioned it. He hasn't had to, he hasn't come forward to say anything bad about that. He hasn't come forward and said anything about Keir Starmer wanting to prosecute the soldiers that fought for his country. You know, he could say something, but without actually saying it. But we could all say we know what he means. But he's just stayed silent, stayed neutral. I mean, how could a king let a government give away their territory and prosecute the soldiers that fought for this country without actually saying anything? It's such a shame. You know, he is a weak king, I'm afraid. And with this thing with Andrew, I think it could be what he's remembered by.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Perry, and I think you're right, because it would be wrong for the king to get involved in government policy, taxation, that sort of thing, public spending. But actually, if it's about the relinquishing of British sovereign territory, Perry, well, he is our sovereign. He is the head of state. He might have a view on it. I tend to agree with you. Well, it's a great question, isn't it? At 6:34 on Talk Breakfast, has the king been too slow to act in the handling of this crisis? Has he been asleep at the wheel? Kinsey, where were you when the news broke? Were you tucked up in bed?
Mark, I was so unconscious. I was so unconscious. I woke up to 90 text messages and emails and calls and jumped out of bed, slapped my face on and got to work. But can I
Were any of those messages from King Charles? Oh, Kinsey, what do I do now?
Yeah, he knew I was there. He knew I'd be there to have his back. But can I add to your list really quick of powerful images of Andrew that I think will go down in infamy?
Go for it.
There's the image of Andrew and Epstein walking around Central Park, which I will always be haunted by. And additionally, I don't know if you've seen TMZ today. I sent you this link, but TMZ has images of Andrew with a toddler and a breast ball that he's playing with on the ground. And they have to go out of their way to stress that he was not left alone with this toddler, which gives you a sense of the way the American media is covering him as a predator. But some very unflattering coverage, obviously, here in the States.
Right. Well, listen, I've just clicked on this link. Thank you for sending it to us. That is breaking news at 10 minutes past 6. The US website TMZ have released an image of Prince Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, of course, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, on a rug, actually on his knees, in the company of a small child that's playing with a ball which looks like a breast. Now, we don't have the ability to verify that image at the moment, but TMZ, of course, Kinsey, are a bona fide news organisation, are they not? Do we know anything about the veracity of this image?
I mean, it's just popped up. We're going to have to sit and wait and see.
But TMZ is not some blog from a lunatic in his mother's bedroom, right?
No, Harvey Levin is one of the most well-respected attorneys in Los Angeles, and he owns TMZ.
Well, this is quite extraordinary, and I think this is a major development for the Andrew story. There's no suggestion of wrongdoing, of course. It's worth stressing that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor denies those allegations. Kinsey, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to show that image to Neil Wallace. And whilst you have a look at that, Neil, Rupert Bell is Talk's royal correspondent. Rupert, are you aware of this new image circulating online of Andrew with a small child and a ball which looks like a human breast?
Well, I'm just asking Kinsey to send it to me. Please, Kinsey. Sorry your throat's not got any better, but you've done an awful lot of talking recently. Yeah, well, I haven't seen that, but it just, if there is something like out there, and if it can be backed up, it just shows what an unedifying mess this is turning out to be for all and sundry. And yes, at that wow moment at 10 o'clock when it came, as we all got our mobiles going ping, ping, ping with notifications of this, it definitely felt inevitable. But it just, when it happened, and suddenly the speed and the sort of intensity of it, sort of, I think, took us all by surprise, and the way the police have gone about it. And it almost feels like from that last group of emails that came out, it then has just unraveled for Andrew like nothing else. The pace of it, the police, and the sort of way it's moved forward and have said, right, there definitely appears there's something going wrong with these latest allegations. And that picture yesterday of him coming out home from the police station shows a man completely broken. But we all have to say, unfortunately, he's brought about himself.
Right. Neil, I need your reaction to this image which is circulating online of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor on all fours on a rug with an unnamed very young child, perhaps 2 or 3 years of age, playing a ball that looks like a human breast.
Yeah, I would say that child's younger than 2 or 3. It's quite a shocking picture, and it why would someone take that picture? What is that about?
Now, of course, we'll stress there's no allegation that there was any activity with this child, who, you're absolutely right, by the way. It's hard to judge because the face is understandably blurred out, but this could be a sort of 18-month-year-old child. And he's on his all fours. That's right. I mean, we'll play with little children. You got friends that have got kids, and you're on the rug. Yeah. But we've got this ball which is made up like a human breast.
Most strange thing. I've never seen anything like that, I have to say.
Wildly inappropriate. What we're going to do is get that image up for those that are watching on YouTube, and I would urge you to jump on YouTube once we've got it. And my goodness, what a development. Rupert, have a look at that when you get a chance. Kinsey, the former prince is now back at home on the Sandringham estate, but this could just be a brief stay of execution. This story is not going away.
That's correct, and it's my understanding, I've talked to some of my sources, that perhaps the objective here was to surprise him, get him away from the home so that they could have access to multiple homes, scour those homes for hard drives or any paperwork that might exist that might help them in their investigation regarding Andrew sharing confidential information with Jeffrey Epstein, because at this point in time, that is all he's accused of and being arrested of. Everything we've ever talked about over the last few years regarding inappropriate behavior with young women, irrelevant at this point. They're just trying to prove that he shared confidential information in a government capacity with Jeffrey Epstein. And so perhaps they collected what they needed in those 11 hours. If not, I'm assuming that they'll ask King Charles for more access, whether that's his former office at Buckingham Palace or whatever it is. I also imagine this is an incredibly hard, this is an incredibly hard pursuit because he's been moving out of Royal Lodge. So who's to say he's not grabbing papers and tossing them into the fireplace? Maybe that is why we saw such a sense of urgency here, because law enforcement realized that he was moving from one place to another, and things could get lost in the shuffle.
Most definitely. What we do know, Neil, is that this story isn't going anywhere. The allegations that absolutely dog Andrew will persist, will they not? And it's unlikely that the police will say, OK, we've looked at your role as an envoy, no case to answer, move on, and we all live happily ever after.
The way these things work, they would not be at this stage unless they thought there was a long way to go on this story. This isn't just random. This isn't just, well, let's give it a go. This is very early in this story, incidentally, very early in this investigation for them to have acted so swiftly and so dramatically. You've got to remember the police have their, if you like, their own image to look after here. What they don't want to do is to effectively start a huge investigation or kick off a huge investigation with one of the most famous people in the world and then just walk away. They've moved very quickly, very dramatically. They have plainly felt there is a lot for them to go at. And I think to a certain extent, I think whoever it was, whether it is Kinsey or your royal correspondent who said this, the fact that they went in now would suggest that they thought there was an opportunity because he is moving around, where in fact an awful lot of stuff will be there. And I was quite surprised, frankly, that they left the house so quickly. I guess they took everything that they could find from the place, and this will run and run and run. This, you can't underestimate how big a story this is.
And Rupert, the King has told the authorities the law must be followed. At this point, Andrew has no protection. He's not an HRH, he's not the Duke of York, he's not a prince, and justice must prevail. That's the clear message from the palace, Rupert.
Yeah, and it has to be, because the public will see it, if it's not, a stitch-up. And I think that's the big problem for the monarchy. You know, Andrew's actions are causing a great deal of grief for the king. And there he is trying to brush, you know, going to a public event yesterday with Stella McCartney, trying to look as business as usual. As he said in his statement, we will continue to serve. But this is a major problem, because if there is any sense that this is covered up and there's not a proper and full investigation, then I think the British public will be feeling frustrated. Now, yeah, as Andrew has always said, he protests his innocence. Well, if there's going to be a trial, if it leads to that, then the due process has to happen. It will be uncomfortable for the royal family, and they've got to find a way of navigating through this. But it's uncharted territory for them. And it's, you know, for the king, unfortunately, his reign will be defined by what his younger brother has done and caused him to, you know, have to make these kind of statements, and the pressure that he's under while recovering from cancer. This is very hard for the monarchy, but they need to be seen to be giving the authorities every support, wherever way it takes. They have got to be seen to be fully supportive of the police investigation.
What did you make of the King's statement, Kinsey? Was there enough in there to keep the royal family out of harm's way?
You know, I still believe what I told you yesterday and probably for the last 2 weeks. I think that he needs to speak to the public directly in a similar fashion to the way Queen Elizabeth did after the death of Princess Diana. I think that that would be really meaningful, and it would give people a sense of peace. But what's so interesting to me about this, Mark, is that, you know, it was his 66th birthday yesterday. For 66 years, Andrew's been protected under that steel umbrella that the royal family has in the form of these powerhouse attorneys, and they all use the same representation, and they are just known as Rottweiler attorneys. And this is the first time, really, where Andrew is having to look for outside help. And we know he's broke as a joke. So I mean, I imagine he's having to go to friends and say, do you mind helping me out here? Because I've got to go find a vicious attorney to help me get out of this mess, and I don't have the finances to do so.
Should Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor now be removed from the line of succession? Now, Robert Jobson has been a royal correspondent for over 35 years, and he's the author of the best-selling book about the royal family, The Windsor Legacy. He joins us now. Good morning, Robert.
Morning, Mark.
What might the legacy be of this scandal, Robert?
Well, it's death by 1,000 cuts. My personal belief is, I saw what Anne Widdecombe says earlier, and yes, of course, we have sympathy for the King. But there's several things that are quite important here, that this has been going on not in the last 6 months. This has been going on for around 16 or so years. And in that time, the royal family could have acted, could have done more, made more decisive decisions. And I fear that the more that comes out, the more damaging it will be for the monarchy as an institution. Not because they're guilty of any crimes, but because they're guilty of a cover-up at the very least. Because look, let's look at this. Hush money was paid, something like £12 million was paid to Virginia Giuffre over the civil case. Why was that money paid? Andrew at the time said he had no recollection of who the woman was. Why would you pay £12 million to a woman that you don't know who it is? And who paid that money? We understand from the Sun that it was the late Queen, whose legacy does come under question now, and Prince Philip, of course, that paid some money. They also wrote that Prince Charles, now King, paid some money, although that was not a statement wasn't issued, but that was said that it didn't happen. But there's a lot to answer for the monarchy here, and of course, as for Andrew being he's not, obviously he's an innocent man until court, but we know he's a proven liar because he said he never can. During the Newsnight interview, he said he cut all ties with Epstein in 2010, which clearly is not true.
Well, I think it's right that you're examining the actions of Queen Elizabeth II at the time, because yes, we must be sympathetic in understanding, Robert, that she was an aged person at that point with a number of health issues, but she was compos mentis and she was the boss.
Well, she was, Mark, and we're talking about going back to 2010. The Queen was in very good. She was still travelling on international visits. She was very sharp. She had people around her that were very sharp. The decision was taken, I think, at the behest of her and Tony Blair's government to appoint Prince Andrew, as he was then, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, HRH, as he was then, right to the heart of the monarchy. It's easy to distance him now. That's only just happened. But in 2010, when the crimes or alleged crimes happened, he was at the heart of the monarchy, and that's the point. But the current king, when he was Prince of Wales, I understand, was very against the idea that Andrew becomes a trade envoy. He voiced his concerns, but he was outranked. He wasn't in charge. He wasn't the boss then. He would have not wanted his brother to do that. He felt that his brother wasn't qualified for the role, hadn't had enough preparation in the diplomatic world like he had to do that role. Now, they really should have listened to the king then, but he was outranked, and I think also Prince William, from what I understand, feels not enough decisive action was taken at the time by Her late Majesty, who did a brilliant job as Queen. I don't wish to,
of course,
in any way she was an incredible lady who did an amazing amount. But obviously her son, she was blinded by her love for her son and the lies that he clearly told. I mean, because if he'd given out to both the king, current king, and the late Queen, the information that has emerged from the Department of Justice emails, they would have obviously acted quicker.
And being lied to is no defence for a public institution. The Prime Minister has felt the heat, given the fact that he appointed Lord Mandelson. The Prime Minister's defence was that Mandelson was not honest about the nature of his friendship with Epstein. Well, that was no defence, and Starmer has been held accountable as a result. The firm should be no different.
Well, I think this is the big problem, and if you've hit the nail on the head here, Mark, is that the royal family, there's a lot of deference has been involved with the royal family. I've covered the story for 35 years. They're protected by the Freedom of Information Act, which they don't have to answer to. There's the official secrets, all the deference and that goes on, and that proper questions are not answered. But I feel that what that actually has been to the detriment of the monarchy. I think it should actually be more. I think this moment in time, the king should have gone on television while he had a chance. I think he issued a very, very good statement, actually, but I think it should have been read out, and I think so people could see the pain and see the honesty in his eyes and say, we're going to go forward. I will lead this institution with Prince William to another level of transparency and accountability. And whatever happens with this case, I assure you that on my watch, we will be open and honest, and there'll be more access to information. Because, in all honesty, the protections that the royal family have has led to this complacency that has led to this problem.
Is it difficult to conceive that the likes of King Charles and the late Queen were unaware of Andrew's activities, given the fact that you can't just usher in young girls into Buckingham Palace willy-nilly, that there are checks and balances there, that you've got the management of the royal family as defined as the firm, you've got bodyguards, you've got butlers and all the rest of it. Is it hard to imagine that they didn't know the nature and flavour of what Andrew was up to?
Well, there you have a photograph of Andrew and his behaviour on the Sandringham estate just weeks before the Queen had her family there for Christmas. I mean, I wrote a piece in my book, The Windsor Legacy, about how he was supplying sex aids and sex toys and things and the staff were appalled that these would be given out to guests on this straightforward shooting weekend, as he described it in ridiculous terms. The point of it is, no, I think it is impossible for them not to have known what was going on. I do think that there's enough people that will probably have to be interviewed in this case that would have passed information up the line. And if they didn't, then the system is fundamentally flawed, because if things like this have been happening at Talk Radio or Talk TV, there's a due diligence and process here. What the problem here is, I think that the royal family are operating in the last century. We live in a world now where things are operating online 24/7. People expect to have answers. And this crisis many years ago probably would have got shut down, a few whispers in friendly editors' ears, and it would have been shut down. But younger people are online all the time. They will not allow this to just disappear and for an establishment cover-up. And they will expect that there'll be answers. I think that the monarchy will survive this. I mean, it survived other things. It survived wars. It survived revolutions. The reality is it does need to learn from it and actually have a better organisation with more due diligence, more accountability and more transparency.
Would any alleged cover-up come to light? Can we hope that journalists doing their work, the likes of yourself and others, will actually, get to the heart of this story? Will the cover-up, if it's happened, be exposed? And if so, does Charles pay with his job?
Well, I think this is a very important question. I think it's important that the monarchy open up, allow people to do their jobs. If there has been a cover-up, it needs to be resolved, because we know that President Nixon and all the president's men, the film and actually the actual real events, he never ordered the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, but it cost him his job because of the cover-up, not the crime.
Yeah.
So I think that there's been 16 years or more, and where things were not dealt with in the correct way, and the procedure didn't. Some sort of procedure should have been followed, where if there'd been a situation like this, it should have been exposed. I do think that we all need answers about the £12 million that was paid and who by.
Most definitely. Well, Robert, I've spoken to Dickie Arbiter and a couple of other leading journalists and royal reporters this morning, and they've all dismissed the idea that Charles might have to abdicate to save the royal family. But as I've said before, if a CEO of a company is responsible for the actions of someone within that organisation, and if it's an egregious crime of which they're found guilty, well, the boss would resign. So do you think it's conceivable that Charles may eventually abdicate in order to save the institution?
No, I think the King is fighting his personal battles with the cancer. I think he's been doing that courageously. I think that he's also, when he came into ascended to the throne, he had all sorts of plans for change and making things happen that are done differently. But it's very difficult to sort of redirect a huge ship like this, like the monarchy. Will he pay with his job? I don't think so. I think that he's innocent of any, that he would have not, he hasn't personally done anything wrong. But if it's exposed that there was a cover-up and that he actually paid money in part of that, which of course the palace are denying, then that will make it a very difficult position. I mean, also I do think that people now are looking to the next generation. They're also looking to a more modern, as I say, more accountable and transparent institution. Whether he pays, I personally don't think that will happen, but I think it'll be incredibly difficult for him to go around doing his job. Look, we have America probably the end of April. Do we think there's going to be quite the same level of deference from people on the streets of Washington when the King is there trying to do his job, building on the special relationship between the United States and Britain? It's going to be very difficult, because obviously people are going to try and hijack that visit and make it and embarrass the Crown as a result, and as a result the country too.
Well, I think it's not inconceivable that William might be installed as king if this does blow up in their face, and if Charles is considered to have been not just asleep at the wheel on this story and behind the curve, but actually culpable. Of course, so we've got no evidence that that's the case at the moment. Just briefly, Robert, if Charles were to fall, is William politically safe? Would he be the reset if this were existential for the monarchy?
No, I think that really, I agree. I hear what you're saying, Mark, but I don't think the king is, should be looking to abdicate or in any way, shape, or form. But I mean,
even if he was at the top of an organisation that covered up the egregious alleged crimes.
Trouble is, it's very speculative. We have no evidence of that. What we do have evidence is that so far as Andrew has lied and the police are investigating everything else.
Yeah.
As for William, I think he's very qualified for the role. Yeah, absolutely.
And is he? Would you say, notwithstanding then, and I take your point about Charles, would you say that politically he's insulated from this? And I use the word politically deliberately because this is quite political in its own way, isn't it?
I think that Prince William, when he was the Duke of Cambridge, made it very clear that the royal family should have made more decisive action. I remember having a story about the Garter ceremony when Andrew was insisting on going, and William said quite categorically, "If he's there, I'm not going to go," and so he had to back down, even though his name was printed on the procession. Look, I think that both the King and Prince William tried very, very hard to stop this developing. Prince Charles, when he was Prince Charles, didn't want Andrew to be the envoy. He voiced his concerns both to the Blair government and to his mother, the Queen, but he was overridden. So what more could he have done at that time? It's not hindsight. He acted at that time and said he wasn't qualified. I think that the Duke of Kent did this job as trade envoy for many years before Andrew. Not a whisper of scandal. He just did his duty. I think it's down to the individual of Andrew that's caused this.
There's also the small matter of photographs being published on the respected US news media site TMZ of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor in the early 2010s playing with a young child. No problem, he's on the carpet with the kid. That's what anyone would do when they play with a child. There's no evidence of any sort of sexual element to that, except that this small toddler, maybe 12 or 18 months of age, is playing with a ball that looks exactly like a human breast. Now, there are some suggestions that this would be an aid for teething, but this is a very, very provocative device. If I'm honest with you, it looks like a sort of a sex toy. It's the sort of kind of thing you would see at an adult party, not appropriate for a young child. Andrew photographed in the context of that. More bad headlines, perhaps a reflection on his judgment. What we do want to do is get the context of that photograph and those set of photographs. We don't know the full story, but we'd like answers. Di Davies is a former head of Royal Protection. Good morning, Di.
Good morning to you.
Di, we're going to get to the events of the last 24 hours shortly, but can I get your instant response to this new set of images that have come, we understand, courtesy of the Epstein files? And this is Andrew around 2010, 2011, in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, with a young child, maybe 12 or 18 months of age, playing with a ball that looks 100% exactly like a replica of a human breast. Just as a guy and a father and perhaps a grandfather, what do you make of these images?
Well, it's a further indication, if you like, of everything that now is being piled against Andrew. I think to a point there needs now to be a little rest. I think he has been arrested, and I think to continue to go after him in every shape and form, while some of his actions are despicable, allegedly, I think it's time now to perhaps let justice take its course and let the police do their job. I've been demanding, as you know, for a number of years that they do their job, and I think it's time now to let them get on, but to keep a watchful eye to ensure that they are going to do their job properly and investigate the whole aspects of the allegation, including something now clearly you're alluding to in one sense, the sexual offences, the alleged sexual trafficking. It's quite clear that this man's morals, that he hasn't got any, and therefore it just adds to the grist against him. But I think it's time now that we let the police get on.
Most definitely. And what is your appraisal of the police's operation in the last 24 hours?
Well, I think they did the right thing, as I used to do when I would raid somebody when I was a street cop. You don't tell anybody you're going. You go in very early. You catch the person you're after by surprise. They were quite late by my standards. We often went in at 5 or 6 a.m. where you have complete surprise. He apparently didn't tell the king. Apparently they did tell somebody in the Home Office, which is probably right. But I think surprise was key. And again, to seize documents, although surely he and his advisors must have known this was coming. This is a complex investigation. And I'm concerned that there may be a number of get-out clauses, as we saw with Burrell. That's my biggest concern. What did he tell? What did the king and the royal family know? And could that be a get-out clause for me? I am seriously concerned that we'd have a repetition of what happened with the Burrell trial.
Well, that is a very interesting thought. Now, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was processed like a common criminal suspect after being arrested at his home yesterday, including being fingerprinted and having a mugshot taken. He's no longer Prince Andrew. He's a mere commoner. Will he have been read his rights?
Yes,
Di, will you have had you have the right to remain silent?
Yes, to answer your question. Everything would be done by the book, and more by the book, I would have thought. So I would have thought this is now in the hands of a very senior detective from Thames Valley, but assisted by the National Crime Agency at whatever support and structure they required. But no, he would have gone like any other alleged criminal. A desk sergeant or the custody sergeant would have made sure he understood while he was there. They probably may have taken his clothes off him. They will have taken DNA swabs. And as you say, a mug. I mean, the fall from grace, as many have said, none of us can recall anything like this. It is a dreadful stain on the British royal family. And, you know, I have some sympathy for the family as a whole. As far as we know, they're not involved in this in any way or shape. I mean, the main family. I'm not talking about his ex-wife or even his daughters. I'm talking about the main family. And I think it's a shame and detracts, as many have said, from the good work some of them are doing.
And how will some of your former colleagues responsible for royal protection be processing this, those that have guarded Andrew for many years?
Well, quite clearly, they now, as I understand it, the Metropolitan Police are looking at that specific angle. Last time I understood, they were saying, you know, we haven't found anything. But clearly, for all those years of traveling the world, traveling with him all over the place, they clearly, some of them must have seen some aspects. They surely must give some kind of evidence to what that extent that would be, whether they were party to it, but they are no different to any other citizen. If you see or hear or aid and abet somebody in a crime, and as a police officer, doing nothing is not an option. So clearly, if there's evidence to show that anyone, including police officers, private secretaries, ambassadors, you name it, if there's clear evidence, but it requires a police skill, it requires somebody with a determination and an attachment from the fact they are police officers. It's sad, but if they have colluded or not done what they should have in respect of Andrew, then they must take the consequence, as must everyone else connected with this. People have kept quiet. I call it a conspiracy of silence. Who are part of that conspiracy remains to be seen, but the police must investigate. And this time, if they don't, they must be held to account.
If a bodyguard witnessed the trafficking of a young woman for sex, and that crime happened on the royal estate, would a bodyguard's silence be an offence?
Yes. No ifs, no buts. He would be duty-bound as a police officer. There's numerous stated cases where police officers over the years have turned a blind eye, and that's proven, and they are then found guilty. And it could amount to malfeasance or misconduct in office. And one of the cases I know, an officer who used data to find out information, I think he got 9 years.
Can we then interpret the silence of those who protected Andrew as the former prince's best defence?
Well, I can't comment, and it'd be wrong for me to know what evidence is there one way or the other. But if there's evidence to show they colluded or didn't do what any normal, just a human being should do, but as a police officer, there's a higher level of responsibility. And if it can be proven that anyone did that, not just police officers, but anyone, including public servants, they then would have to take the consequences. This, as I said, I think yesterday on many programs, this is a Pandora's box, and that box just has got so bigger. And the tentacles, I don't know where they're going to stop going.
And Di, is it conceivable that the firm, as it's known, which is the management of the royal family, was responsible for a cover-up? Is that possible?
Well, given this sordid tale, anything is possible. I think we'd have to go where the evidence takes us, or rather the evidence. And the fact that Thames Valley are doing it in conjunction now with 10 other forces is indicative of the range of issues. What is interesting is what evidence is there at Buckingham Palace? What evidence is there on stored computers?
Well,
there?
Di, let me interrupt you. Can you sneak young Russian models into Buckingham Palace without anyone knowing?
Sneaking is an interesting word. You can say to a police officer or those on the gates, Mrs. Windsor, if you give them a code name, please let her in. Or in some cases, him in. You know, in fairness, the police, if told by a senior royal, I am having a guest in whatever shape or form, unless you have grounds to suspect they are fixated or criminal in intent, the police will allow them in. And that has always been the case.
How do you see this scandal playing out, Di?
Oh, above my pay grade by any definition.
Well, you don't have the information at your disposal, do you? I mean, some people suggest, Di, that when it comes to these sorts of allegations, the process is the punishment. It could be that, notwithstanding Andrew's protestations of innocence, that with all of these headlines and cop cars on the Sandringham estate, the damage to the royal family is already done.
Well, yes, that's a fair point. I would hope it's not damaged beyond all repair. I say again, it's interesting what role people knew in the palace, their senior courtiers and others. And so that's why I'm saying the tentacles and the English into this of who knew what, when and where and how long this has been either been covered up or people didn't ask the right questions. When you're in a position of authority, such as I was, you have to ask questions of your subordinates. You have to question what is going on. And one of the key things in royalty protection is preparation. Without preparation and then documenting that preparation, that's part of how you keep people safe. In reverse, that can be used against you if it goes wrong and there's an inquiry.
Di, briefly, if you can, it's hard, isn't it, to imagine and conceive that if these alleged crimes, which Andrew denies, were committed, it's impossible to imagine that those protecting Andrew won't have known that something was up, that it was on their radar. But my next question to you is, just briefly, is there a culture of fear around members of the royal family where perhaps a bodyguard might witness something untoward but is afraid to speak out?
No is the honest answer.
Well, neither the palace nor Andrew knew that the cops would come calling yesterday.
What a shock. Apparently it happened at 8 a.m. He'd just finished his breakfast. Probably pleased about that. And, you know, all this sort of numerous police coming in and taking him away. I think it's gives you a very, very a bad shock, whoever you are. And he just went off. I don't know if they put, you know, cameras on his arms, but he, you know, off he went.
Well, it's a great question. It's a great question. And you're right to ask, Angela, was he handcuffed on arrest? We do know that his DNA was taken and his fingerprints and a mugshot. How the mighty have fallen. This is a humbling experience for a famously arrogant man, Angela.
Yes, I mean, he's been arrogant ever since he was a teenage about women and about the sea and about everything else, and felt that he wanted to be the king rather than Charles. He didn't think Charles was suitable. And of course, it's always the heir, the first one, not the second. And he angered his mother because he kept on about it. So he did think he was very superior.
So Andrew wanted to be king?
Andrew desperately wanted to be king. He nagged and nagged his father and his mother and said that Charles was not necessary to do it. He didn't have the power and he was hopeless. So he was after this for years, and it couldn't happen. I mean, they weren't going to change it. But the Philip and the Queen liked him much better than Charles because he was a sort of lots of sport and strong, whereas Charles would like flowers and reading and music. And Prince Philip thought he was much better. The Queen loved him, and we know he was her favourite, and that's how it was. But he was very cross that he wasn't allowed to do this. He had a sort of thing on his shoulder that it made him very cross. And also he didn't like Camilla either, and made up all sorts of stories about how unresponsible she was and all that. But the Queen didn't listen to this either eventually. But he did think of himself far better than most other people would.
So Andrew tried to poison the Queen's mind against Camilla, is your suggestion there, which is pretty outrageous. And you mentioned that Andrew would like to have been king. We can only imagine how things would be if that had come to pass. Did he suffer from, and has he suffered from, the curse of the spare, which has affected Margaret and, of course, more recently, Harry?
Yes, he did. It's very interesting, isn't it, that these number twos and spares...
He's a number two, isn't he?
Yes, they need help because they have to... at the beginning, they're sort of the next one, they're in line, and then they drop by, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. And, you feel what's your point. And I know that Prince and William and Catherine are trying very, very hard to make their children understand different ways of behaving, because it'll be George who will get it, and then, the other two won't for a long time. And they're trying to make sure that they have another life and they can actually manage very well.
Might William accede to the throne sooner than expected, Angela?
Well, it's hard to know. The king says he's going to carry on as normal, but he isn't well. I thought he looked terrible in the photograph of going to the, clothes day.
The Fashion Week.
Yes. I just wondered that he looked very upset and very stressed. But it might come back and he decides that he absolutely wants to do it. But if not, and he stands down, then William will take over, and he's never liked his uncle, and maybe that'd be quite a good thing. I do feel that, at the age of the king and his health, that it should be thought about. It's the first time I've ever thought like that, because I think he's a terrific man. But he might just recover. He'll have a lot of people looking after him, emotionally as well as physically, and he might just feel better. We don't know what's going to happen with all the police and what they're going to do and what they're going to say and where Andrew is going to be. So I thought that Andrew might go off in the far distance and not come back, and make it quite difficult for people to talk to him, but we'll have to see about that one.
How do you think, Angela, this news is going down in Montecito, California? What do you think the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, make of this scandal?
That's a very good question. In the one hand, Harry actually, I think, might be really upset and angry and worried. largely worried, but he's got this plan that he wants to take over from his brother. So I don't know that he's actually concentrating on it. As for Meghan, she doesn't want to come back now. She did want to, but now she doesn't. And she said it would affect her work. So, that's the sort of thing she said. And that's not.
When you say she doesn't want to come back, do you mean pay a visit in the summer or next year for Invictus?
Well, no, I mean, Harry wants to come back altogether.
Fully?
Yes, but she doesn't. I mean, she might come back. She sent a list of what she wants to wear, and so that she might come back. It's a very expensive list, but she'll be there. But I think she won't want that. I think she'll be quite scared about what could happen, and it would affect everybody's what they think about her.
Why would she be scared? Do you mean for her safety or her reputation, Angela?
Reputation.
Boos from the crowd, bad headlines.
Yes, she doesn't understand why people don't think she's the #1 in the world, but people don't, and she can't understand why that's happening. So it's difficult for her, but I expect that she might stay and not come over at all.
And could that be a stress point in the marriage within the Sussexes?
I think there are a lot of stress points at the moment because Harry seems very miserable and she's phony smiling, isn't she? I know when she sat watching the sport last week, she waved at everyone. She often does that. Nobody's there, but she waves with a huge smile. And she kept rubbing his side of his arm until he did it. And, he did it about 3 or 4 times. And you think, this is what you might do to an 18-month-old child.
Yeah.
So smile, little one. Come on, smile.
She treated him like a performing monkey. Are we in the throes of a Sussex marriage rift?
I think we've been in for that for about a year now. I think Harry doesn't know what to do, but it's
is that relationship, Angela? Sorry to interrupt you. Is that relationship terminal? Is it a matter of when, not if, they split?
Well, you never know. You can't tell that. But I think Meghan would like somebody who's richer, who's got more money, and but she also wants somebody who does what she tells them. So it's a difficult one. Yeah. And Harry just knows he's doing nothing at all, and he feels that he needs to go and help out with the royal family. But before he was screaming at them and hating it and being unbelievably badly behaved. So the fact that he thinks he can go back when he hasn't done anything there for several years, it's not possible, is it? Because it's such a different way of life.
And Angela, Meghan Markle surely loves all of this royal drama because there's no love lost between her and the institution of the monarchy. It's my humble opinion, Angela, that she would like to destroy the British monarchy, so she's probably quite happy that Andrew is doing his bit.
Oh, I've thought that she wants to destroy it for a long time, but Harry would want to move in and get her to be the Queen. I think I've mentioned it to you once before.
Well, yes, but I want to ask you about that, Angela. I mean, are you not up a gum tree there, given the fact that, yes, Harry may have his ambitions, and he's full of himself, as we know, but you've got a candidate in William that has a spotless record as a frontline serving royal, a guy that's good looking with a happy marriage and 3 beautiful kids. How, in God's name, could he possibly leapfrog the very admirable William?
Well, Harry thinks he's got more energy, more fun, and that people like him better than Andrew, than
William.
Than William. But it's not so much how good he is, it's just that how he and Meghan might make it very difficult for Catherine, because Meghan has been very unpleasant about Catherine, and if Catherine is still not entirely recovered from her cancer, which she has at the moment, but it may come back, I hope not, I think William will look after her rather than actually want to be king. But that might not be true. in any case, I mean, Harry or Meghan can't take over until George. He's the next one, although he's very young.
Yes.
But if there's a crushing of the royal family altogether, then she would want it, because she would want to have the, I am royal.
Police are searching the Royal Lodge in Windsor for a second day. Now, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was released under investigation after arrest for misconduct in public office. That happened yesterday on his 66th birthday. Well, the police searches are ongoing today with cops at the Royal Lodge in Windsor. Of course, this is a sprawling property boasting 30 rooms. Andrew had a lengthy lease there, but was forced to leave following further revelations in the context of the Epstein files. Well, cops are back in the Royal Lodge. They're going through computers. They're going through drawers. They're looking at documents. And this is very much an active investigation. Let's get further reaction from Norman Baker, the author of And What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. Norman Baker, of course, is also a former Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament. Good morning, Norman.
Morning, Mark.
What's your reaction to the events of the last 24 hours? Are you surprised at how this has played out?
Not entirely. I mean, there was a huge amount of public pressure which was building up, indeed from the media as well, to try and do something. The Daily Mail ran a headline saying, when are the police going to do something? So I think they have finally done something. They've been reluctant over many years to engage with allegations against the royal family, but they've finally been forced to do so. I think the reason that Andrew was arrested, as opposed to being interviewed under caution, which was the alternative strategy, is that the arrest allows the police to have a warrant to search the property. And quite clearly what they're doing is looking for evidence at both Royal Lodge and indeed up in Norfolk.
Is the damage to the royal brand already done, or could things get worse for King Charles?
Oh, the things could get much worse. I mean, what Andrew has done has been to open the floodgates here. And now questions are being asked not simply about Andrew, but about royal finances, quite rightly. The House of Commons Public Accounts Committee are looking into Crown Estate properties and why Andrew and Edward have been living on a peppercorn rent for enormous properties. So a whole lot of questions which have been building up for many years, and which, by the way, I set out in my book, are now being actively looked at, not simply by the media, but by Parliament as well. So this has got a long way to run, and a whole lot of unpleasant material from the royal family's point of view is going to come out, I think. In terms of the narrow aspect of Andrew, then there are questions to be asked of Charles and William as to what they knew when. Because, we were reporting, I was reporting as an MP 20 years ago about the excessive behaviour of Andrew when he was a trade envoy, about the private jets he was taking at public expense to go and play golf, that sort of thing. So they've done nothing about him for a very long period of time. So they've got questions to answer too.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it, that the palace authorities, the management of the monarchy, who are known as the firm, and the key players, Charles and others, didn't know that, to a degree, Andrew was a problematic member of the family.
They did know, obviously they knew, and the strategy from the royal family always, throughout the decades, has been to try to smother things over and hope they'll go away. And that was a strategy they employed for quite a long period of time. When that didn't work, the second strategy was to say, this is Andrew, nothing to do with us, we're immune from this, ring-fence Andrew is a problem. But I'm afraid, the third stage, which we're now entering, is, what did they know about it? And what have they done about all this? Not simply the trade envoy matters, but also the allegations to do with Virginia Giuffre and others.
Now, politics, of course, is an area about which you know a lot, Norman, as a former Member of Parliament yourself. And in politics, if you've got a cabinet minister or even the Prime Minister that presides over a scandal, even if it's not their fault, they will normally step down in order to diffuse the situation and put a full stop on the issue. Could this lead to Charles being unseated from the throne?
I don't think that's going to happen, but what I think there is a mounting pressure on is to remove Andrew from the line of succession. Let's be quite clear. He's eighth in line to the throne. He's not likely to get there. But in the event that Charles had died before William and Harry were born, we would now be having King Andrew I on the throne. So, the system is not very perfect, is it?
No, it isn't. And it would require a special act of Parliament and the agreement of Commonwealth nations. Do you think it will happen?
I don't think Charles will be removed as a consequence of this, but I think the monarchy will have to amend its ways.
Yeah.
It will have to become more transparent, far more accountable. It will have to become better value for money from the taxpayer. He's going to have to recalculate and refabricate the firm in a way that he doesn't want to do, to make it much more like a European monarchy. If he doesn't do that, then my word of advice for him is the tree that doesn't bend will break.
Yes, well, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor denies all wrongdoing. He's not been arrested for anything surrounding Virginia Giuffre or any other allegation that followed the release of the Epstein files. Can I also bring you up to speed on another developing story, Norman? And it's a photograph published by the respected US media outlet TMZ. And it's photographs of Andrew, we understand, in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate with a young child, maybe 12 or 18 months of age, playing with a ball which is an exact replica of a female breast. Just your reaction to this?
Well, we don't know who the child. I didn't know that picture before you've just introduced it, Mark, and I don't know we don't know who the child is, and nor should we know probably. But I mean, that's very tacky, isn't it? But I mean, Andrew is tacky. I mean, up at Royal Lodge, he had a toilet roll holder that played "God Save the Queen" when you pulled the paper.
You couldn't make it up, could you? Norman, lovely to see you. Do join us again soon. It's been a long time since we spoke on the radio and the telly. Norman Baker is the author of What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. Norman says that actually this police investigation means that we will have full access to the financial dealings of the royal family, which could be a headache for the king.
Right then, let's go live to Sandringham. Thomas Godfrey is a news reporter for the Sun newspaper. Thomas, dramatic developments in the last 24 hours. We know, of course, that Andrew is back at Sandringham. What's the latest?
Good morning, Peter. Yes, the dust is still settling on one of the most dramatic days in the history of the royal family yesterday, as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was rushed away after a knock at the door from Thames Valley Police. This morning it is much quieter here on the Wood Farm estate, where Andrew is temporarily living before he moves to his new permanent home at Marsh Farm here in Norfolk. We've seen a few cars coming and going. An unmarked white van, potentially a delivery van, drove through the front gate here a short while ago. That's now left. A few staff out and about as well, and of course the presence of the police more generally. They're not searching this address. Those searches were concluded yesterday evening before Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor returned home from the police station. Obviously at Royal Lodge in Windsor this morning, police are back, continuing to look for any evidence that may aid what is now a full-blown criminal investigation.
This is really dramatic for the royal family. It's dramatic for the country as well. What happens now, Thomas? I mean, you've covered so many different crimes and investigations for the Sun not involving our former prince, but given that he has been released under investigation, what does that actually mean? What happens next?
Well, let's be very clear. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor will not be given any special treatment by the police. They'll have a lot of time now, several weeks potentially, to work out with their partners at the Crown Prosecution Service whether they can lay any charges down or whether they need to investigate more. There is still the potential that Andrew is called in for a second interview, or that other police forces, who we know...
Oh, I think we've just lost the connection to Thomas there, but I think what he was about to say is about those other police forces that are looking into this. And we know that Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, has written to quite a number of police forces. I'll see if I can just see the list in front of me. I know that there are many police forces that have cover areas that are to do with airports, for example, and certainly, yes, here's the list. He has done he sent a letter, a 5-page memo. This is Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, to the Metropolitan Police, Surrey, Sussex, Thames Valley, Norfolk and Bedfordshire constabularies, which of course cover Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, RAF Marham and RAF Horsham, among other airports and air bases. So there are so many different elements to this. I think we're back with Thomas. Thomas, I've just been outlining Gordon Brown there sending this 5-page memo. Gordon Brown saying the memorandum provides new and additional information to that which I've submitted to the Met, Essex and Thames Valley police forces, where I expressed my concern that we secured justice for trafficked girls and women. Now, what Andrew was actually arrested for yesterday is not actually to do with the women, is it? It's to do with misconduct in public office, which by itself can be a very complex charge. He hasn't been charged yet, of course, but can be a very complex thing.
Yeah, we normally see misconduct in public office used for police officers who may be corrupt, or for prison officers, some very notable cases recently. It's quite a broad offence. It's a common law offence. There's no sort of statutory outline of what it actually is, but there are a few key components. Obviously, the police in this case, we know before arresting Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, were liaising with specialist prosecutors in this field to establish if there was any basis on which he could be interviewed over this. This all relates, of course, to Andrew's decade as the UK's global trade envoy. He went around the world on behalf of the Foreign Office and the Business Department, liaising with foreign governments, trying to strike trade deals, trying to help promote Britain on the global stage. But there was criticism over his links to Epstein in that role, and the latest tranche of emails appears to show Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor forwarding on reports from some of those trips. Now, he hasn't responded to those allegations yet. He has denied other wrongdoing in his relationship with Epstein. But this is a really, really complex offence. It could take quite a while to actually work out on what grounds he could be charged, if he's going to be charged. And of course, searches are still ongoing, and the police may well be looking for more evidence, other emails even potentially from his Buckingham Palace email account, which we know he was using because it's listed in the files, to see if this could have happened potentially, allegedly, multiple times.
Very interesting to talk to you. If there, we'll check in with you perhaps a bit later on. There's Thomas Godfrey there, news reporter at The Sun, down at Sandringham, near to where Andrew is now. Di Davies is a former head of Royal Protection. Di, thank you for joining me this morning. There are questions not just about Andrew, but also about who saw what, when. I just wonder, from a Royal Protection perspective, he had, of course, and still does have Metropolitan Police officers who look after him as part of the Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit. And Thames Valley Police as well, looking after him too. I just wonder, Di, if an officer were to see something that they thought was a crime, what would they do about it, or what should they do about it?
Well, a very good morning, Peter.
Morning.
In respect of what a police officer do, should be exactly like anybody else. He should report it and or take action at the time. We've been talking about misconduct in office, and quite often that somewhat vague common law offence has often been used against police officers for failing or carrying out unlawful duties in their role as a public servant, prison officers. So there is no excuse if any police officer sees a crime being committed, he or she has to act. If they can't act immediately, then they should bring that to the attention of their managers and or leaders. And that's what should have happened in this case. Should any police officer at any time in that period where, well, throughout his life until recently, they were with him. So questions, surely, common sense says they have to be interviewed.
The things that Andrew is being accused of are very, very serious. Of course, he denies all the allegations against him in regard to women. We know as well, women and girls, it should be said. But what he is being arrested for is misconduct in public office. I just wonder, if you're a Royal Protection officer and something reasonably minor happens, how much discretion do you have? I'm not saying anything Andrew did or didn't do was minor, but if you're looking after, let's say, for example, a royal princess who's 16 and someone hands her a glass of wine or invites her to the pub, what do you then do? That's illegal.
Well, yes, and there's precedent with that, with Harry and other juniors, and even Prince Charles, when he was in Gordonston, or King Charles as he won, that very issue that he went to a pub and they gave him a drink when he was underage. Common sense applies. And again, in today's, if somebody gave him a spiff or something like that, you would politely say, come on, you shouldn't do that. And arguably, I would say, you'd stamp on it or put it down the loo and give him a good bollocking. And in fairness, juvenile members of the royal family were given, because quite often in those days, the protection officer was much older, much wiser, and that's what would happen. But there is no excuse for any compliance or aiding and abetting any crime at all, and there is procedure to deal with it. And so questions must be asked, sadly, of all those years and all those officers who must...
So what's going to happen? I mean, we've talked about the minor stuff, we've talked about the major allegations. So will those police forces, perhaps Thames Valley Police, now be wanting to go through and talk to all of those royal and special protection officers who've looked after Andrew over the years? If they were in America with him and they turned a blind eye to things, surely those officers as well as Andrew would be subject to perhaps criminal investigation at some point.
Well, I think you're right. Whether it's Thames Valley or the Metropolitan Police themselves, who apparently are now investigating some aspects of what personal protection officers have known. And let's face it, we're going back. He's been protected all his life. Now, clearly, they would have to narrow that down to the periods in question and possibly before, slightly, and after. So there are so many questions, not only of police officers, but of those public servants that went with him, diplomats, staff, valets, butlers. I mean, the tentacles of this, I said earlier this morning, a Pandora's box. Well, that box is huge, and it needs coordination between now 10 forces, and somebody at the appropriate level will have to decide on a strategic plan and then action that plan into a variety of different actions. And that's going to be quite complex. And then, of course, throughout this, you will have specialist crime CPS lawyers advising, because so far it's misconduct in public office, which is enormously vague. And truth, no high-ranking official has ever in this country been prosecuted. There are so many loopholes in it, and it worries me that they ought to be looking at other aspects of the investigation, not relying on misconduct, in my opinion.
But certainly misconduct in public office, as you say, is one of those charges that, and he hasn't been charged yet, but that is one of those things that, as you say, can be vague. So they really should, in your opinion, look for other ways to perhaps charge him, you think. And of course, there are so many questions saying, well, look, if he was trade envoy and he was sending things to people that he shouldn't have been sending, what about all the other evidence, and there is lots of evidence in the public domain about his role with Epstein, about his role with young women, the allegations against Virginia Giuffre? There's been no criminal sanction to do with that, for example. Could that, presumably, that is another avenue that prosecutors and the police should be looking at?
Well, most certainly. You're absolutely right. And that's why I say the tentacles of this, including the Official Secrets Act, if that applies to very sensitive military information, which he would have been party to over the years. You know, he was going around all around the world talking about British arms sales, all manner of things. So he would have been given the top level, possibly secret information. Well, did he release that? These are part of the investigation. So this is only the start of a complex investigation into him. And don't forget his ex-wife and others who may have aided and abetted him, including private secretaries. I'm not going to name anybody, but they are in the public domain.
Yeah, there are a number of names of people who may have forwarded things on. Certainly very, very interesting, and the tentacles will go everywhere.